Team, every single day, hazards and risks pose a threat to our ability to accomplish the mission and take care of those who are in our charge. In this video, we're going to break down ATP 5-19, which gives us the tools and the resources needed to help identify and mitigate these risks in order to be able to do those two things, right? Accomplish the mission and take care of our soldiers, which is what leadership is all about. Man, if this is something that you're into, make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell so you can stay up to date on future content, and make sure you drop some comments down below. That way we can continue to keep this conversation rolling. Right, so ATP 5-19, which is ATP 5-19, which is risk management, is only about 80 pages long. So it's not a large document to read and to absorb. And you should honestly be able to do that in about an evening, right? And even less than that. In this video, we're going to break down some of the very specific things that I think that we all need to have in our kit bag. We're going to review some basic board questions and talk about how to apply this practically speaking as well, right? So first thing that we need to know and identify, and I'm going to throw up a screenshot here, is the actual process for risk management, right? So we have 5 steps, right? The first one is to identify the hazards, and then we need to assess those hazards, develop controls and make risk decisions, implement controls, and then supervise and evaluate. And then this is a circle. It's cyclic. It never stops, right? It's always continuing to move on. So of course that would be a standard board question as well. And this is something that you need to know and to be able to talk about. In this next image I'm going to show up is going to kind of break down the 2 basic things that we have to do as it comes to risk management, right? And that's identify the probability of something happening and then correlate that with the risk that it poses to ourselves, to our equipment, or to the mission, right? Probability and severity. These 2 things is what we have to work through and identify. So as we see, as we're looking at with the probability, we have everything from frequent to unlikely. And then from our severity, from catastrophic all the way down to negligible. And then so where something ranks in this is going to help identify what that risk level is, from extremely high to a low risk. And what we want to try to do is mitigate things to get it down to as low of a risk as possible, and that's acceptable for that commander. When it comes to the control measures that we're going to use, we have a couple different types of criteria that we need to bear in mind, and that is that it should be feasible, it should be acceptable, it should be suitable, it should support standards and training of the personnel as well as the leadership and that individual as well, right? Does that make sense? So if you get nothing from this video, if you know these tables and these diagrams and you can talk about them coherently, it's going to enable you, especially if you're in a board, to be able to talk about risk management in a little bit broader of a way, and it's going to help demonstrate your knowledge and your expertise in order to take care of those who are in your charge. So the ATP actually goes into, before we get into some standard questions, kind of, to be honest with you, the way to think about and to talk about risk management, especially in a board. Right? You may be asked a situational question, right? We're going to get into some standard questions here in a minute, but you could be asked a situational question. And the way to do that, in my opinion, having been on a board and a member of a board, and as of course appearing before boards, 5-6 dozen times, right? If not more, is to talk about situational questions in such a way that it helps demonstrate a breadth of knowledge. And one of the ways that we can do that is by using our TLPs, right? And so here's a quick screenshot from the ATP, and it goes through and identifies where everything is happening along with our troop leading procedures, right? So we receive the mission, we issue that order, and we make a tentative plan. And so we're going through those first 3 steps in our risk management of identifying the hazards, assessing the hazards, and developing controls, right? And then of course now we start to initiate movement, conduct our reconnaissance, complete our plan, and now we're implementing controls, and then we start to issue the order, supervise, and refine, and then that of course leads into supervising and evaluating those controls that we put into place. So if somebody were to say, hey, Schmuckatelli, maybe you're getting ready to go on a convoy operation. How are you going to identify risks associated with this convoy because you're getting ready to go push out, maybe a couple 100 miles? So if you answer that question, but frame it within some TLPs, it's going to help bridge the gap between a couple different subject areas. And you can do this for dang near anything. If you know your TLPs, you can use that process even if you don't quite know the answer to the question, even if you don't quite know what a board member might be looking for. If I can frame it from starting from receiving the mission, and I can go all the way through supervising and refining of what I'm going to do, man, that's money. You can barely go wrong when you do stuff like that. And so I hope that makes sense, team. And from here, we're going to move on to some standard questions. I had those written down, so we're going to pull some of these up and I'm going to read through them. The most basic question is what regulation covers risk management, and of course that's ATP 5-19. And I'm going to tell you, as a board member, I'm never going to ask a softball question like that, but you should know that answer. That should be the very first thing that you study, is what is that regulation number, what is it called, and what does it relate to? Because even if you don't get asked that specific question, you can use that in an answer. Well, for Sergeant, according to ATP 5-19, boom, I can finish responding to another question, right? So, for example, what are the risk management steps, which we already talked about. So, accordance with ATP 5-19, the risk management steps are to identify the hazards, assess those hazards, develop controls, make risk decisions, implement controls, supervise, and evaluate. Boom. See, I kind of took two answers and I fused them into one to give to that board member. What is risk management? Identifying and assessing control risks arising from operational factors, right? What are the basic principles of risk management? Principles of risk management are to be integrated into all phases of the missions and operations, make risk decisions at the appropriate level, accept no unnecessary risk, apply risk management cyclically and continuously, right? The risk levels, again, we already looked at this table that talks about those risk levels, and that's from extremely high all the way to low. You should know that your company commander can sign off on a risk management worksheet if the overall risk assessment level is low, and your battalion commander would be medium, right? How is risk level determined? And that's by using the risk matrix, table 1 in 5-19. Now, what are the three categories of controls, right? And so it's going to be educational controls, physical controls, and hazard elimination. So things like educational controls is going to be training that we're going to use, whether it's sergeant's time training, whether it's some hip pocket training. I'm teaching somebody how to do something physically in order to be able to help mitigate risks and control those hazards. Some physical controls, those are going to be included in things like setting specific uniform that people should be wearing, right? It's going to be doing things like doing things only in appropriate locations at appropriate times, and having supervisors on the ground mitigating those risks. Hazard elimination tools and controls, these are going to be things that are going to be used to help eliminate the risks or the hazards altogether. For example, for PT, you probably have some routes on your post that are closed to vehicular traffic during specific times. So I'm eliminating the risk altogether and taking it out of the equation. That way it doesn't pose a threat. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the deliberate risk assessment worksheet, right? And so you should do one of these for every training event that you lead and that you manage, okay? So whether it's a PT event, whether it's a convoy, whether it's a field training exercise, whatever it is, there should be a risk management worksheet that is done, because we cannot accept risk, right? That's up to the commander to accept risk. So we need to put something in front of their face, a document that they can review and that they can sign and say, I am good with these control measures that we're going to use and implement, and I'm good with the end state and that overall risk assessment level. So you should never feel like you have to recreate one of these from scratch. Now, A, there are tons of examples online that you can find, and B, if you talk to your peers, if you talk to some of your seniors, you probably have some of these on SharePoint or on a shared drive that you can use and then manipulate to get to the thing that you're trying to get to, right? Does that make sense? Like, everybody's done PT, everybody's done a combat obstacle course, everybody's done sling load operations, everybody's done a convoy, everybody's done a field training exercise. So you're not recreating this from scratch, but you should make sure that you look back through a document to make sure that it's good, right? Yeah, and make some improvements where you need to. That way the product that you present is solid in its quality. Nobody's going to question you. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of times we will do that a lot. We will cut and paste something and then give it to somebody for signature without spending even 2 seconds looking at it to make sure that it's right. And it could be filled with mistakes. And so we need to identify that on the front end, because that's our name, that's our word. When we give something to somebody, we're saying, I've looked at this. It could be a risk management worksheet, man. It could be an award. It could be an evaluation. When you give it to somebody else for review, you're saying, I've already given it my once over, and I'm telling you that this thing is good to go for you to look at and to sign. So do the right thing. Part 1 is all basically administrative data about the mission and the task itself. Typically this may be an op order number, a title, a description. Maybe it is just an obstacle course for physical readiness training, whatever the case is. And then you have that preparer's name and all of their information, the unit, and then down to the UIC, and then any supporting plan or op order as required. And then it's going to have a signature by that preparer. And then here you start going into subtasks, right? So sometimes you may not have a subtask because maybe there is nothing else that's going on for this particular event, right? So for a physical training event, I'm not going to talk about vehicular traffic if I'm not using any vehicles, so I don't have to worry about that. But if I was going to meet up at a motor pool and the whole plan included us convoying from the motor pool out to a leader's reaction course, then I can't just do a worksheet that's going to talk about the risk or about the leader's reaction course. I also need to talk about that convoy. So then I can go and I can pull this other worksheet that talks about convoy operations, and I can input that as a subtask in on this one for the leader's reaction course, right? So I have my convoy to get there. That's a subtask of this whole plan, right? And then I have all the controls that we're going to implement while we're out there at the LRC. Does that make sense? And when I'm thinking about subtasks and risks associated, it should be realistic. You don't want to think about planes falling out of the sky, because that is extremely unlikely. As catastrophic as it is so unlikely that I don't need to identify that as a hazard. So the hazards and the risks that I identify on this worksheet should be realistic. It should be something that has happened before. Now, if you're going out to do any number of things, man, there are tons of examples, and I'm sure you can think of where things went wrong and it resulted in somebody twisting an ankle, hurting their knee or hip, breaking equipment, shorting out some power supplies, vehicles breaking down, recovery operations having to be employed. So you think about all these things and you identify them, and then identify what that control measure is going to be, and then you identify what the overall risk level is going to be, right? And who's actually going to implement the controls. So we do all these things. Again, we're making sure that those controls are reasonable, that they're going to actually work. Know and remember what sort of control measures do I need, whether it's educational, whether it's supervisory, or eliminating a risk altogether. And we input these things in and identify the right person who's going to actually do it, whether it's the individual or whether it's a NCO or whoever that it may be, right? So T-Man, I hope you enjoyed the content of this one. If you did, again, make sure you like it. Leave some comments down below. That way we can continue to keep this conversation rolling. Man, as always, I appreciate all you guys. And until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.